Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be doing my power rankings for the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix. So starting in 20th place, staying in the same position as last race, is Logan Sargent. Okay, we might have to be going to a different marker today. But for Sargent, not a great weekend overall. I think pace-wise, this was one of his strongest weekends in Formula One. Didn't out-qualify Alex Albon, but was very, very close to out-qualifying him. I believe in the sprint shootout, or either qualifying or the sprint shoot, one or the two. Race was a bit trickier. Of course, retired lap 42 with dehydration. Obviously, he was the only driver who did retire because of that, but still not great. I do think it may bring up some questions about his conditioning, but seeing some of the other drivers after the race as well, it was really, really tough, and many drivers are saying it's like the toughest race of their career. So again, I don't really fault him too much for retiring. Wasn't really any risk given he was out of the points, and you don't want to crash the car and cause a lot of damage to both himself and to the car. The sprint was a bit trickier. He made that silly mistake after the first safety car, beached the car in the gravel, and that was it. So I think unfortunately for him, pace-wise looked pretty good, but again, unfortunately 2 DNFs for him. Number 19, staying in the same position as well, is Lance Stroll. Okay, I'm going to switch markers at this point, but for Lance Stroll, not a fantastic weekend. Was again knocked out in Q1, I believe, both races, and the pace in qualifying was really, really poor. In the sprint race, I believe he even pit for tires because he couldn't manage the tires properly, the soft tires. The race was a little better. He was very, very close to getting points. If he hadn't gotten the penalty for track limits, he would have been able to, I think, get points today. So the race was a little bit better, but still overall not really good, and still miles off his teammate Alonso, particularly in one lap pace, which has, for whatever reason, been getting worse the second half of the season. Number 18, dropping 2 positions, is Sergio Perez. So for Perez, another weekend that went pretty much very, very poorly, very, very poor. Both qualifying sessions were pretty rough. Got knocked out in Q2 in session for the main race. Got into Q3 for the sprint. In the sprint, had that collision with Ocon and Hulkenberg. It was a racing incident. I do put a little bit more blame on Ocon for that. But that being said, I do think that all 3 of them have to take a little bit of responsibility for that. Of course, because Perez was coming from so far back, he should have been able to see that both Ocon and Hulkenberg were there. So he would have known that he basically was overtaking 2 cars at that point. So a little bit risky with that move. But that being said, I do think it wasn't entirely his fault. Race, I think, starting from the pit lane, I expected a lot more from him. He was having real challenges overtaking other cars on track. He did manage to get past those cars, but we saw Russell in the Mercedes, who was basically going up at the same time as him, and Russell was making it look much easier than Perez. So really, really struggling in the race in a car that I do think was still the fastest car in that race. Of course, picking up 2 time penalties for track limits didn't help as well. So overall, another really poor weekend. I think he really needs to start trying to build some consistency and get some good results. Otherwise, it's P2 in the championship may be at risk, which would be quite something given the speed of that car. Number 17, I think this is a bit harsh, but I think I had to move some of the other drivers up, and dropping 5 positions, tied for the most positions dropped, is Liam Lawson. So for Lawson, qualifying was pretty rough. Out-qualified by Tsunoda, did out-qualify him in the sprint, but then in the sprint got knocked out, made a silly mistake at the second corner, and basically beached himself in the gravel. In the main race, he struggled, I think, quite a bit with his tires. The Alpha Tauri's didn't look very good on their tires. They were down basically fighting with the Haas's, but Tsunoda did look like the better driver of the 2 throughout the race. So on top of the silly mistake, coupled with a pretty poor race, I think I've moved down Lawson 5 positions. But that being said, not a terrible race, but still not a great race either. And I think at this point, it looks like all of the indications are that this will be his last race this year. Of course, there's lots of speculation online about him potentially even having a seat next year if things fall a certain way with certain Mexican driver in Red Bull. But for the time being, this may be his last race for over a year. Number 16, Nico Hülkenberg, moving up one position. For Hülkenberg, I think he did a really good job in the sprint qualifying. Sprint was a bit unlucky to get sandwiched between Ocon and Perez. Might have been able to get a point given that he was on the medium tires, which would have been basically gold for Haas. The main Grand Prix, of course, made that silly mistake. Basically went into Sainz's grid position because he was the driver directly behind Sainz. And of course, that's very, understandable. Pace in the race wasn't particularly good. I think he was the last classified finisher. That being said, I think his pace in qualifying and the sprint was very good. So I've moved him up ahead of Lawson. Number 16, dropping one position, not because of it through any fault of their own, is Yuki Tsunoda. Of course, split qualifying with Lawson, like I just mentioned. The race, I think both races in the sprint was pretty anonymous, didn't really have a whole lot of track camera time. Did see him have some good battles with Albon though, so that was nice to see. That being said, I think finished well outside the points. I do think they were a bit more optimistic with the pace this weekend given the update package they brought to Japan. But that being said, not a fantastic result for Tsunoda, and I've moved him down not because of poor performances on his part, but because I needed to move other drivers up. Number 14, moving up 4 positions, and one of, 4 drivers to move up 4 positions. Most of any drivers this weekend is Zhou Guanyu. So amazing result in the race today, going from 20th on the grid to P9, I believe. So 2 really valuable points for Alfa Romeo. Should seal them being ahead of Haas in the Constructors' Championship. I don't think they have enough pace to get to the Williams. But that being said, if we have a couple crazy races between now and the end of the year, I guess it's possible on paper. But for sure, really solid race. Managed the tires really well. And was definitely causing headaches for drivers like Perez, who was really struggling to overtake him. I think qualifying though has been hurting Zhou this season. Was out last, qualified last for the main Grand Prix. Bottas qualified P10, so I think it really showed that the pace was there. I do think that that's something that Zhou needs to focus on because the race pace this year has been pretty good. Number 13, staying in the same position, Kevin Magnussen. So for Magnussen, pretty anonymous weekend, so it's really hard for me to judge his weekend overall. Was out-qualified both times by Hülkenberg, and I could probably justify moving him down further, or even switching him with Tsunoda. But that being said, I think he had a decent results in both the sprint and the main Grand Prix, given the Haas's pace. I believe beat Hülkenberg in the main Grand Prix, and of course beat Hülkenberg in the sprint, given that Hülkenberg DNF'd. Number 12, moving down one position, is Pierre Gasly. So for Gasly, a bit of a tricky weekend. I'm trying to remember. So in the race, looked like he might have been able to fight for a point or so, but wasn't able to make it stick. And then of course got the penalty for track limits, and of course overtook Perez and then overtook Stroll off track, so he had to give those positions back. I did think he was on the back foot pretty much all weekend compared to Ocon, pace wise, but still, so overall not a fantastic weekend for Gasly. Number 11, moving up 4 positions and probably one of the stars of the weekend, I think, is Valtteri Bottas. So for Bottas, P8 in the main Grand Prix, which I think is an excellent result for the Alfa Romeo. A little bit fortunate that basically Hamilton's signs were basically knocked out of the race by the first corner, but still very, very good result for him. Well clear of his teammate Zhou in both qualifying sessions and in the race as well. So really excellent result for him. I think he'll be really satisfied with this weekend. Number 10, moving up one position. Or actually, no, not moving and changing at all. Staying in the same spot as last race is Esteban Ocon. So for Ocon, I think really a weekend of 2 halves. In the sprint, DNF'd, I think, should take a little bit more responsibility for that crash given how much space he had on the inside of that corner. The race, though, was very, very good, very strong. got a really good haul of points this weekend, I believe. What result? Let me just go check to see what the result was. Yeah, seventh place in the main Grand Prix, so really excellent result for him, and a really solid haul of points. Number 9, okay, so this is where we get into the top 9. It's an interesting, to make some interesting decisions here, but number 9, moving down 5 positions, tied with Lawson for the biggest drop, is Lewis Hamilton. And, you know, it was already a pretty rough weekend, not out-qualified by Russell in both qualifying and sprint qualifying. But on top of that, he basically broke the cardinal rule in motorsport, which is don't take out your teammate. And he, I think, is pretty much fully to blame for the crash at turn 1. He had a lot more space on the outside of that corner. He knew Russell was there, he knew Verstappen was there, he knew they couldn't move. And I think he just got a little bit too ambitious. Probably thought he was further ahead of Russell than he was, turned in a bit too much, made contact, basically did the reverse of what he did to Verstappen at Cops in 2021, except this time he was the one who moved in too tightly. So really small mistake, really big consequences, no points for him, forced Russell to basically have an incredible recovery drive, but I do think they would have been fighting with the McLarens for the podium without that, and would have had basically really consolidated P2 in the Constructors' Championship if they had been able to do that, especially with Sainz not starting the race. Number 8, dropping 2 positions, is Charles Leclerc. So not a fantastic weekend. I felt it wasn't terrible either, but there was 2 drivers that had to move ahead of Leclerc, so still not great for Leclerc. Split qualifying, lost to Sainz in the sprint, and then of course kind of beat Sainz by default because Sainz didn't race. I think this was always going to be a tough race for Leclerc. The Ferraris I don't think really were that suited to this track. Lots of long corners, something that the Ferraris really struggled with at Zandvoort, for example. So I do think that he did the best that he could today, beating Alonso. But still, I think he'll be wanting a bit more. Number 7, dropping 1 position, probably the lowest this driver has been this season, and that is Fernando Alonso. So for Alonso, it was really close between driver and 6th and himself. I think, at some point we can kind of tell that Stroll is just really mentally checked out, and, the performance between Alonso and Stroll becomes less and less relevant to how Alonso is doing. I do think qualifying went pretty well, a little bit better than they were expecting. But for Alonso, made that really that crucial mistake in the race, dropped that position behind Leclerc. The sprint, I think they were really on the wrong strategy with the tires, starting on the softs, not on the mediums, and I don't think they really had any way to know of what the result of the strategy would be with how the strategy went with everyone being forced to do 3 stops. But nonetheless, I think with that mistake, not a great weekend for Alonso in the main race. But still, I think he's trying to get as many points as possible to try to hold off the McLarens, which at this point is kind of looking less and less likely. Number 6, Alex Albon. So for Albon, got that really crucial point in the sprint, 8th place in the sprint, and I think because of that, getting that 8th place in the sprint, really crucial point for the Williams. I decided to hold him ahead of Alonso, maintain basically the order from last time out. And for Albon, the main Grand Prix was a bit trickier. I think got a 5-second penalty for track limits, one of many drivers to do so. That being said, was kind of outside the points the whole race. I don't think really had a chance of getting points today, but the result in the sprint was excellent, so that kind of made up for it. So very close between Albon and Alonso on my power rankings, but I've decided to keep Albon ahead. So into the top 5 we go, and moving up 5 positions is George Russell. One of the best weekends of Russell's season. Out-qualified Hamilton, both qualifying, sprint qualifying. Sprint race finished 4th, was the best driver on the soft tires. Looked quite a bit better than the Ferraris on those soft tires, managed to hold off Hamilton behind, but still really good sprint. The race, I don't really put any blame on him for that crash at the first corner. and he had an excellent recovery drive. Getting to 4th place, I think, was the best that he could have achieved, and looked much better than Perez, but given that they were at roughly the same spot after the safety car came back in, and was making really good overtakes that Perez wasn't able to make. So overall, the pace from Russell was very, very good, very good recovery drive. I think did the best he could this weekend. Number 4, one of the stars of the weekend, also moving up 4 positions, is Oscar Piastri. Wins the sprint, gets his first win in a sprint, which is a bit odd. Not a real Grand Prix victory, but still excellent result for Piastri, getting that sprint pole, getting the win in the sprint. Qualifying, of course, made that mistake, but still out-qualified Norris, and in the race had an excellent start to move up to P2. I think really just controlled the pace. I think overall the pace, there was still a pace deficit in the race to Norris, but that being said, that's the benefit of starting much higher up and having a great start. So overall, very, very amazing weekend for Piastri. He basically maximized his points haul, finishing 2nd. Let's see, number 3. Okay, so this one is tricky. So Sainz, I'm going to keep in 3rd. He split qualifying with Leclerc, which I think is what would be expected of him. And in the sprint race, beat his teammate. I think finished 5th. Yeah, finished 5th in the sprint, which I think, given that they started on the soft tires, was the best he could do. Didn't start the main Grand Prix. He would have been starting from outside the top 10, but I think would have moved up to 6th or 7th. But of course, I didn't want to penalize him for that, given that it was a Ferrari problem, not related to him crashing, and then the team weren't able to rebuild the car in time, for example. So for Sainz, not really a great weekend, given that he couldn't start the main Grand Prix, but not really his fault. So I've decided to keep him in 3rd place. That leaves the top 2. So staying in the same position, not an amazing weekend, but still a pretty good weekend, I think, is Lando Norris. I think, given that pretty much all the other drivers who were in this top row last time out had pretty poor weekends, Norris basically stays in 2nd. Gets out qualified by his teammate Piastri, both sprint qualifying and qualifying. Sprint race was better. But still had to fight through the field. And he also dropped a lot of positions on the start as well, I remember. Main Grand Prix was pretty good. Showed that McLaren had some real pace, and I do think overall his pace was stronger than Piastri's, but that's what happens. Like I said, made those mistakes in qualifying, had to start 10th, so had to fight his way and overtake quite a few more cars than Piastri did. So overall, I think compared to Piastri, one of his weaker weekends of the season, made quite a few mistakes in qualifying with track limits and getting laps deleted, but when we got to the race in the sprint, he was very good. So, number 1, like always, pretty much all season long, Max Verstappen. So, excellent result for him. Qualifying got pole by quite a good margin. Sprint qualifying, I don't know. He got his first lap in sprint qualifying deleted. And then at the end, I don't know if he had the pace, because Piastri's last lap in Q3 in the sprint qualifying was better than his lead lap. You know, maybe he gave a little bit of margin for error. The sprint, I think he kind of got unlucky with starting on the weak side of the grid, and kind of dropped quite a few positions at the start. Wasn't able to make up that difference on the medium tires, and I think they just decided to bring the car home in 2nd. So not, a terrible result, but I think, the expectation was first going into the sprint. Race weekend today was basically flawless. Led almost every lap except for the couple that Albon led, and was basically masterful with the strategy, making sure he pitted at the right time, controlling the gap, and I believe even lapped Perez at one point before his final pit stop. So excellent race by Verstappen, getting win and fastest lap as well. So that's all for my power rankings for the Qatar Grand Prix. Quite a long video. I think we're at 19 minutes now. Yeah, quite a few incidents with the mirror, with the marker and everything. But that's all for Qatar Grand Prix weekend. We have 2 weeks until our next race at COTA in Austin. So that should be a pretty fun one. I believe that's a sprint weekend as well, which will unfortunately kill my sleep schedule again. But that being said, we have a couple videos coming out between now and then. So if you could watch those, that would be amazing. So thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of this video, and goodbye.